Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is Friday, September 13th, 2024, and you are watching The Rundown, my weekly podcast where I talk about all things happening in the video game industry, from controversy to drama to positive news to just downright criminal activity, some would say. For today's show, we got a little bit of all three. Or all of them. All three, all four? All four or three? Whatever. Numbers. Difficult. As always, I'm your host, Corrupt Ronan, or Alex for some. Some people call me Alex, but you can call me Corrupt Ronan either way, or Koru. I had that name before Jeff Bezos took it and named his yacht after that. So, Jeff, you owe me some money. By the way, I hope you know. For this week's episode, boy, do we got some news to get into. Starting off first with Star Wars Outlaws, and a topic that I kind of touched on a little bit last week in regards to his lackluster sales, but apparently this rabbit hole goes even deeper. And we'll get into that soon here. Also, we'll be talking about the Space Marine 2 sales and how positive that's been for the company over the past week since its launch, which, I mean, what early access? The game, quote-unquote, launched last week Friday, but the official release for everybody else happened on Monday this week. Then there's the drama surrounding the PlayStation 5 Pro reveal, which we'll also get into. And I'm trying not to. I'm gonna try to make it a thing where I don't have like crazy rants for every episode of this podcast. But for the PS5 Pro thing, there might be a little bit of a rant about that, and it might not be the kind of rant you're expecting. Let's put it that way. I have voiced my opinions on this slightly in the past, over the past couple of days during streams, but there's more to this thread that I have not talked about just yet. So we'll get into that later as well. And then also the news that broke yesterday about Annapurna's, I think it's Annapurna of Interactive's collapse that just broke suddenly out of nowhere. And we'll get into that as well, which I also have maybe a little bit of a rant about that as well. But hopefully it won't be anywhere near as long as last week's rant. I'll try to keep it somewhat contained for this week's episode, to make sure this episode doesn't run into a 2-hour long thing. We'll see how that goes. But anyways, without further ado, let's jump into the news, folks, and we'll talk about the Star Wars Outlaws situation and the Ubisoft and how this has affected Ubisoft as a whole in terms of its stock prices. So, because of the I guess you could say, when it comes to Star Wars, can you even call it a lackluster reception? Maybe in terms of like it being a Star Wars property, and perhaps most games not being able to achieve sales like that, but in terms of what Star Wars is, I guess it would be considered lackluster. But let me just go ahead and get us over to that page so you guys can see the news for yourself. As this broke last week, but we'll get more into it. What's the page here? I always get confused which one's which. Here we go. Okay. So this broke out from Forbes last week that the reception towards Star Wars Outlaws is kind of put a bit of a hinder on Ubisoft stock. Where, based on records, if you look over the course of Ubisoft stock from the past year, just the lackluster releases alone has caused Ubisoft stock price to drop roughly 50% over the course of the past year. It is now sitting at about, what is it? Was it 13.86 euros? As of late, when just years ago it was rated to be much higher, but the game has unfortunately affected this because it's failed to reach sales expectations. And this was kind of seen coming for a while now, especially when you talk to people who work inside the retail industry when it came to pre-orders for the game. There wasn't a whole lot of them. And I do recall talking to someone, a friend of mine that I do know, who also works in retail in the UK. Across the Great Pond, if you will. And he said that pre-orders for Outlaws were not hot, even in the stores he worked at, that he was associated with. So it's just, it seems like interest in Star Wars Outlaws overall just was not high in general. And it's definitely showing in terms of the sales and how it has been affecting Ubisoft stock prices. But this tale goes even deeper because apparently investors in Ubisoft are also very displeased with the sales of the game, and they've had quite a bit of a call to action. We got a little bit of news here from one, I believe they're called AJ Investors and Partners. And let me just go ahead and flop to that page real quick so you guys can see it along with me. Because they ain't too happy with what's going on here. Here we go. So there was a public letter issued by AJ Investments and Partners, the founder of the company. I believe their name is Jaraj Krupka. Krupka? I don't know. These names are difficult to pronounce, but anyways. Let's go to the page and I'll show you guys what's going on here. I shall read it to you. This comes from Bounding into Comics. It says, unhappy with the results and fearing for his firm's minority stake in the company. Reading up here for those that want to follow along. AJ Investments and Partners founder and company executive Jaraj Krupka, I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm probably butchering the name. I apologize. Issued a public letter expressing our deep dissatisfaction with the current performance and strategic direction of the company, and calling for its leadership to take Ubisoft private or allow it to be sold to a strategic investor. They go on to say, we believe that Ubisoft at current valuation is deeply undervalued and should be worth between 40 to 45 euro per share. Said Krupka, whose firm holds less than 1% stake in the company. The main reason why the valuation is so low to the peers is that Ubisoft at current state is mismanaged and shareholders are hostages of Gilmore family and members of Tencent who take advantage of them. Management is focused on pleasing investors with beating quarterly results and not focusing on long-term strategies to provide exceptional experience for gamers. Our company has extensive knowledge about the gaming industry, and we were long-term a shareholder in Activision Blizzard, and we started our Ubisoft position a couple weeks ago, and still adding to it. We cannot understand the decision-making process of the current management that is focused on releasing multiple average games per year that are harming Ubisoft's reputation among the gaming community instead of focusing on to provide hit games within its exceptional franchise portfolio. Now, here's where the fun part starts. They also list off proposals that they have for Ubisoft. But here's perhaps the most important one here is the first one. I'll go over that one. Take the company private for fair price. We urge the board to consider taking Ubisoft private with Tencent as a significant partner and shareholder. Ubisoft as a public company is undergoing scrutiny to report better quarterly results to please investors, which may harm strategy going forward, and it's harming Ubisoft at this time. When they need to think long-term to get near into their exceptional franchises. This would allow the company to address its issues away from the public market pressures and make necessary changes without harming minority shareholders, retail investors, and pension funds that are victims of these efficiency problems and mismanagement by current leadership. If Go On and Tencent are not interested in Ubisoft value, now here's the important part. This is the bold part. We urge the current management not to block any takeover, as there are several PE groups that will be interested based on our research. In the event of offer from a PE group or strategic investor, we urge Gilmore family to accept this bid. When this bid will be a fair price, if this offer won't be accepted, we will sue for a reimbursement of damages. Effectively, what they're saying is if Ubisoft can't get its shit together, then they are at risk, yet again, of a hostile takeover. The reason why I say yet again is because not but 5 years ago, Ubisoft had finally gotten out of its spat with a little company or a little firm called Vivendi Universal, which was also threatening a hostile takeover at that time. So at the rate things are going, Ubisoft ain't looking too good right now. And the investors are kind of pissed off at the family-owned company, which is the Gilmore family and Tencent, which they believe that Tencent and both them and Tencent are kind of intentionally dragging the company down with poor decisions overall. And it could be a case that we might not see a Ubisoft for too much longer, or it could be a case that we see a lot of the franchises spin off to different publishers instead. If this keeps going the way that it's going right now, with Star Wars not meeting sales expectations, and even worse because that was a major flagship release for this year. Okay, you take everything back to when Ubisoft was talking about quadruple A titles with Skull and Bones, a game that also didn't meet sales expectations, doing better than your typical game these days, but still overall didn't quite land like they hoped it would. And the budgets behind a lot of these games, you can't imagine that Star Wars Outlaws was cheap to make, okay? Just the license alone is incredibly expensive. On top of the fact that the game didn't sell well, and people just were not that interested. Not well enough to make any money back, and I can't see that game making any profit anytime soon at the rate things are going. But that was one of two major releases. They have one more coming out, I believe, next month, which is Assassin's Creed Shadows. And based on what I talked about this last week as well, I went over some tweets from people that have insiders in the retail business when it comes to video games. Pre-orders for Assassin's Creed Shadows have also been very lackluster. I believe it was a total of 800 physical pre-orders for the game in total over a course of, I believe, 900 stores in the country. 800. Now, again, this could be a case of obviously people mostly buying games digital these days, right? I mean, it's we live in a world now where most things in general are bought digitally. But you can't look at that number and say to yourself, that looks good. It doesn't. And I think I'm trying to recall if Boney told me this about the retail in UK, but I believe he did say that pre-orders over there in the UK for Shadows were not great there either. So Ubisoft is looking like it's in some dire straits right now, and going into the future, it's not looking good, which is unfortunate because Ubisoft as a company, they have a lot of great franchises that they've kind of shit the bed with, for lack of a better way to describe it. Assassin's Creed was amazing at one point until they started churning them out every year for a profit. It became this constant spin, almost Call of Duty-esque, of just a new Assassin's Creed every year, a new one every year, a new one every year, without regarding the quality of the titles and what people are looking for and the lack of evolution in gameplay. Like, Assassin's Creed has had a major influence on the way video games are designed today. It was one of the first, like, I guess you could say it's probably the first major title that has established like a foundation for open world games going forward. And to this day, a lot of open world games still borrow a lot from that foundation, for better or worse. Like, I've already ranted about open world games in a previous episode. And video games, like the cookie cutter shit that video games have been following for the past 20 years now, I guess you could say at this point, or approaching 20 years. And a lot of that could be laid at the foot of Ubisoft for not at least trying to push the envelope forward. And you would think, as a company that kind of started the whole thing, they would be the first ones to try to improve that, but they don't. So we'll see what happens. But right now, yeah, it's not looking good for Ubisoft. And if Assassin's Creed Shadows does not land the way that they hope it does, I don't know. Might not be here for too much longer, or they're probably going to see a hostile takeover by a different company. And whether or not that's better for Ubisoft as a whole, we'll see. I mean, there's kind of a lot of people that are talking about the idea of a lot of their games being influenced by, for lack of a better way to describe it, woke ideology. And a lot of people tend to, I guess, poo-poo on the idea of woke being some kind of nebulous thing that no one can describe. But no, people can describe it. It's just that people that don't want to hear it try to argue about it in bad faith. There is truth to the woke ideology stuff. And whether or not that has had an effect on sales of the games is kind of showing itself today. It would be foolish as a company, as a developer, as a investor to believe that this stuff has had no effect on video game sales going forward. It would be delusional to think that it has not had an effect. The reality is that a lot of people are simply tired of being talked down to all the time. And when you put that stuff in your video games and try to tell your major audience that they are bad people simply because they exist, is it a surprise that they don't buy your games? Is it a surprise that they're not interested? Tracy says in the chat, for me, it's just that I've gotten tired of Assassin's Creed. Many people have. I mean, it's like I said, the influence that Ubisoft has had on open world games can kind of be felt across the industry as a whole. Like, if you played one open world game, you've kind of played them all at this point because they all borrow from the same foundation. So there's a level of oversaturation and just general fatigue in open world games in general, just because of that. And it's a shame that it took them this long to bring Assassin's Creed to the setting that people have been asking since Assassin's Creed 3, which was well over 10 years ago. It says, if it gets good reviews, maybe I'll give it a try. Now, here's where I had to provide a little bit of pushback on that, Vancy. The problem with waiting for good reviews to try that is the fact that you are putting aside your exhaustion with Assassin's Creed. Thomas says, honestly, I've not liked Assassin's Creed since Mirage. The new style does not talk to me. I don't mind that. Like, this was a case of them trying to take Assassin's Creed back to an era where, you know, it was popular, bringing Assassin's Creed back to the Middle Eastern setting that it started off with before. But in my honest opinion, it's a matter of too little, too late. You've had all this time to do what people were asking you to do for the longest time now, and you refused to do it. They were deliberately going out of their way to avoid the Japanese setting. They even said that themselves. They said, we're not going to do the Japanese setting because it's too easy. And that they wanted to try different settings that you would not expect. Which, to be fair, they did. They tried Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which was probably one of their better selling Assassin's Creed games. But then followed that up by going right back to the same formula again. And at this point, people have kind of gotten over it. Like, when you wait too late to listen to the audience when they're saying, hey guys, this game literally builds itself up for the entire idea of taking place in a setting like Japan, where assassins were kind of the thing. You basically play as a fucking ninja in every game. So why wouldn't you put it in the place where ninjas were? How do you miss that opportunity? Now, say Assassin's Creed Shadow comes out, and they, I guess you could say, change the formula, so to speak. The question is, would that be enough? Would that be enough? You have to ask yourself the question of what would they need to change to make you want to play? And whether or not you would trust Ubisoft over the past 20 years of not having doing that to do that now. The major change with Shadows in this particular case is the fact that they added Yasuke, which by and large is not an assassin's character. Now, that in itself presents a problem because people come to Assassin's Creed to play as an assassin. Putting aside the controversy surrounding Yasuke, which has bled its way over into Japan, where even the Japanese are having an issue with this as well. And they have voiced their opinions on that, and they're not very happy about it either. Right down to finding out the source of the whole Yasuke thing to begin with, and he's kind of gone into hiding as well because of it. Yeah, the whole thing with Assassin's Creed Shadows is I would say it was a mystery, but when you look at the controversy surrounding that, when you look at how people are exhausted with Assassin's Creed and Ubisoft in general, I can't see them turning this around. This is what Konami did it with Hari, so who knows? I think you mean Capcom, but yeah. I get what you said. I think you meant Capcom, but yes. It's all good. No worries. The thing about with Capcom and Resident Evil is that it took them up until 7 to finally bring the franchise back to what it was, right? And even then, some would argue that it's still not quite the same. For me, like I had literally almost given up on Capcom when it came to Resident Evil until they put out 7. 7 was kind of the big turnaround point for them when that happened. And that's only because 7 was a drastic departure from what you would expect out of Resident Evil. Which, when you look at Assassin's Creed Shadows, that is not like a drastic departure from gameplay style. You take Resident Evil, you go from a 2D game to a first-person shooter or a first-person perspective, which blew people's minds because it was like, whoa, this doesn't even look like Resident Evil. It takes place in this abandoned house, and it's first person, and there's no zombies. What's going on here? On top of the fact that it cashed in on the popularity that was PT. Because people were still hot on the idea of what that was, even though the studio had shut down and Kojima had left Konami at the time. People were still hungering for that concept, and Resident Evil 7 kind of played on that. Basically, they struck when the iron was hot, and it worked out for them. Yeah, moving forward, we'll see how this goes, but I can't say I have any faith in that. And when you consider with what the content they've been going with games these days, it doesn't look particularly great going into the future, especially for Ubisoft's case. I've had very little interest in their games since I think Assassin's Creed Valhalla might have been the last game I was really interested in. I didn't get a chance to play Mirage because it came out at a time where there was a lot of other games that came out, and I couldn't bring myself to want to sit through that as the fatigue of open world games really started to set in around that point. But I don't know. I wanted to be excited for Assassin's Creed Shadows, but the more they show of it, the less excited I become. Moving on to other news. Off of that very depressing topic when it comes to video games and Ubisoft in general, let's hop into something a little more positive, shall we? And that news being that Warhammer 40K Space Marine 2 has crossed over 2 million players. Which is kind of wild when you think about it, because there was a lot of like questionable things going on behind the scenes that people were kind of concerned about, whether it would be from hiring practices and the recent drama going on with Games Workshop and, you know, their recent decisions on factions, we'll say, in the Warhammer pantheon. People were concerned that some of that might have bled its way into Space Marine 2, which I didn't really have too much concern about to begin with, because I knew the game was already pretty much done even before this drama even took place. If I recall, the game was supposed to be out like last year, and they pushed it off for an entire year for a delay. So at that point, whatever story content they had was pretty much done. It was just a case of features, polish, and I guess the multiplayer stuff that kind of came out as well. So they had enough time to put that stuff in on top of that. But yeah, considering there's been a lot of games that have kind of been disappointments in terms of whether their content or their sales, to see a game that is not Black Myth Wukong actually making it, although still not quite pulling Black Myth Wukong numbers. Let's be honest here. Black Myth Wukong is still quite popular, considering it's been well over quite a few weeks since that game is released, and it's still doing numbers for sure. But to have another game come out that is not Black Myth Wukong and still do pretty well is quite impressive. And considering that it is Warhammer and there is quite a fan base behind Warhammer as a whole, myself included, perhaps it's not too surprising that this game sold well. So shout out to Saber Interactive, shout out to Focus, shout out to Space Marine 2. I will eventually get around to playing that at some point on stream. It's going to take some time because I got to finish up Black Myth Wukong. That game has got a lot going on, and I kind of want to see as much as I can of it before I finish it. We'll get Space Marine 2 at some point, but yeah, don't know if we're pulling that out. From what I saw, at least when it comes to the numbers of the game, and I'll try to pull this up real quick so that you guys can see it. Too. I hate it when it does that. Damn it, OBS. Come on. Hey, break here. All right. So we got Black Myth Wukong here, and then as you can see, that game is still pulling numbers. Like there's still 166,000 players that are playing it right now, and over over the course of the last 24 hours, there were 729,000 people playing it. So that game is obviously still pulling in the numbers, regardless. However, that does not mean that Space Marine 2 has been slept on, because it certainly hasn't. Let me just go ahead and show you guys a number on that one too. Doing this shit live. Doing it on the fly, baby. Doing it on the fly. There we go. All right. So we're sitting at, let's see, 130,000 players that are playing right now. And it peaked at 225,000 when the game went into official launch on Monday of this week. Not the early access stuff that happened last week on Friday. This is the official, like, actual release that everybody can buy. And it topped out at 225,000 players. So that's quite significant and better than the last few particular releases that came out over the past few weeks, like a Concord, for example, which couldn't even cross a measly 700 players, let alone 225,000. Is this a demonstration that people are kind of sick of the political ideology shit that's in video games, or what people would describe as woke stuff in video games? Possibly. It also could be a case that this is just Warhammer and people love Warhammer and Space Marine in general. Although my argument against that is that there have been a lot of Warhammer games that have come out over the past few years, and none of them have reached anywhere close to the numbers that Space Marine 2 has been reaching right now. From what I've seen, it appears to be, because as somebody who has played the first Space Marine and loved that game, it harkened back to an era where violence, just straight up violence in video games, just tearing shit up, ripping things apart, and shooting things in the face was kind of the thing that people enjoyed. And from what I've seen so far in Space Marine 2, it seems to be more of that. Ratcheted up to 100 or 11 or 100, whichever one you want to describe it. It's just more of that. And there seems to be nothing in the game that talks about whether it be gender politics, racial politics, none of that stuff. I mean, for the three characters that you have by your side of the game, you're playing as Titus, who was the main character in the first game. And then you have two people in your squad, one of which is an Asian character and the other one is a black guy. And no one is batting an eye at that, because to them it's like whatever. It's just three dudes going around shooting aliens in the face. And it seems to me like that's what people want these days. It's not an open world game. It's actually pretty linear, just like the first one was. But no one cares. People just want more of that. So if I had to guess, that's what's been leading the charge on this game's sales so far. There's been an absence of games like this in the industry, and people clearly want more of that. It's kind of crazy to me that the major selling games that have happened this year, none of which are open world. You got Black Myth Wukong, you got Space Marine 2, you have Stellar Blade, none of which are open world games. Also, when you talk about free-to-play games, you got The First Descendant that is also hit as well, and that's also doing quite well. You got other free-to-play games like Mecha Break that did really well in its beta, and Marvel Rivals, which also did really well. So, when you actually make video games that people want to play, video games, they either have characters that look cool or appealing, or perhaps in some cases even have that sexual appeal to them. That's what people gravitate to. That's where your sales are. Not the shit you see in a game like Dustborn, which seems to be checking boxes for every DEI list that you could possibly think of. Those games seem to be the ones that are falling by the wayside. And perhaps for good reason. But all right. Jump into some more news here, because I got this keeps going. This train keeps on going, baby. So next up, I said I'm going to try. I'm going to try not to rant about this, but I can't guarantee how this is going to pan out. So earlier this week, matter of fact, just a couple days ago, was the reveal. Let's go back to the other page here real quick. Was the reveal of the PlayStation 5 Pro. And we kind of all knew this was coming. The rumors about this happening had been going on for well over a year. It was just a matter of, it wasn't a matter of if Sony was going to do it, it was a matter of when. But I also had the question of why, considering the sales of the PlayStation 5 in general have not necessarily met Sony's expectations. And that in many cases, the hype behind it has started dying down for a while and sales are starting to drop off. If I had to guess, partly due to the reasons that there's not a whole hell of a lot of PlayStation 5 games these days exclusively, which leads to the reason for buying one not being all that sound, especially now. So this idea of releasing a half-step improvement console similar to that of the PS4 just seemed kind of crazy to me. But I do understand that when your sales are kind of dropping off like this, a half-step console can be like a small shot in the arm to increase sales because people like their new shiny technology, and of course people are more than happy to buy the latest and greatest thing. There was the joke that me and a viewer had on one of my recent streams that comparing Sony and PlayStation to Apple, where people will buy the next thing because it's the next thing, the new shiny toy, basically the expensive shiny toy. And I can't see PlayStation being any different in regards to the PS5 Pro. I got how do I have 2 pages of that open here real quick? All right, there we go. So let me go over to the page and we'll talk about this a little bit. And again, I'll try not to rant, but I do have something to rant about. So the console's been revealed at the price point of $699 US, which would be, what is that, 699 British pounds and 799 euros for European friends. And apparently 119,980 yen, which includes tax in Japan, which is kind of crazy. In Japan, there was a recent announcement that they were going up on the price of the base model of PlayStation, which Japanese gamers have expressed not being too happy about. So to see this happen as well, and to see that both the European crowd and the Japanese crowd are the ones that have to pay more, I can't see this going over too well with that crowd either. Although, and this will probably go into my rant when I get into this, I guess. But there's some hypocrisy going on here that I do have to get into. But anyways, they showed off a little presentation, which I find hilarious because the video of the presentation or the stream was 20 minutes long, 9 of which was actually about the reveal, where the other like 10 or so was about a countdown. It's a huge waste of people's time. Thanks, Sony. But as you guys can see, the console looks as expected. Looks very similar to a PlayStation 5. Minus the disk drive, which is an important point to pay attention to. For those who want a disk drive with the console, because if not, then the console is digital only, the disk drive will drop you another $80 as a separate purchase, on top of the fact that the console also doesn't include a stand. You'll have to buy one of those too. Which is hilarious, because if you look in the picture I have for the thumbnail of this podcast, go back to that real quick. You can see the console there. It has a stand. Sold separately, by the way. You have to buy that too. So what does this bad boy come with? Let's talk about it. So what makes this console an improvement over the first one? Well, obviously there's the upgraded GPU, which they're claiming is about 45% faster for gameplay than the base model. Then talking about the advanced ray tracing features. But most importantly is the AI-driven upscaling. And for those of you who are, I guess, in the tech-savvy world, if you know anything about NVIDIA's DLSS and how that works, then PlayStation's version of that, which they're calling PSSR, which stands for PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution, it's basically the same as DLSS. It's taking a game running at a lower resolution and then upscaling that to a higher resolution. Let's say you're playing the game. Let's say the game has an internal resolution of 1440p. Then the AI upscaling tool will then upscale that to your 4K screen as close to 4K as it can possibly get by using AI upscaling to make that happen. And with AI versus your typical upscalers, there's an improvement there in the sense that, let's use DLSS for example, where it can resolve small detail almost better than what native resolution can do. In some cases, not all cases, but in some cases it does that. So you're pretty much getting the equivalent of that on the PlayStation 5 Pro, which sounds great overall. The problem with this, though, is that in order for you to see those differences, and they even show this in the video where they demonstrated this, is that you practically have to zoom into the screen with a magnifying glass to spot those differences. The average person is not going to care. Does it play my video games? Yes? Okay. And that's all they care about. This stuff sounds great on paper, but to the average person, no one's going to care about this stuff. So the question then becomes, who is this for? According to analysts, they would say this is for the quote-unquote ultra enthusiast gamer. The kind of gamer that wants the hot new thing, the latest and greatest, the bells and whistles and then some. The best graphics you could possibly get. To which I would argue, in my honest opinion, if you're someone who cares about graphics that much, playing on a console is not the way to go. These improvements sound great on paper. The upgraded GPU improvements sound great on paper. But as somebody who has delved into the PC scene, I know there are limitations there as well. You can upgrade your GPU until you're blue in the face. The latest and greatest, you keep swapping in that new one every single chance you get. However, this is the sticker. If you're never upgrading the CPU will indeed become a bottleneck that holds the GPU back. In this case, the PS5 Pro has roughly the same CPU as the base model. In other words, it will eventually run into cases where the CPU holds it back. So the improvements you get will eventually run out. It will run into limitations very similar to that of last generation consoles, where you're still not getting that 4K native resolution. And the frame rates, those are also going to go by the wayside as well. Because as you push the graphical envelope forward with new features, better ray tracing, so on and so forth, you're going to have to sacrifice frame rate for that. And resolution. And when you're not upgrading the CPU to match that, you're going to hit that bottleneck real fast. So while these improvements sound great on paper, they're only going to go so far. And what I find even sadder about this is that in order for the console to be, I guess, feature complete or feature parity with the base model, is that you have to spend upwards of $800 to make it feature complete. You want a disk drive? That's $80. You're throwing taxes, putting you well on $800. That doesn't include the stand, which, by the way, you can see here, it says vertical stand sold separately. And I guess they try to make up with that by having a 2 terabyte SSD this time instead of a 1 terabyte in the base model, because obviously people are going to be downloading their games more than buying physical copies. And what I do find interesting here is that they led off with it being digital only, which, if you remember, the base model consoles of the PS5 came with a physical edition and a digital edition. And I can't help but wonder if this was a case of the digital edition outselling the physical edition, because people, for lack of a better way to say it, people are typically buying games digitally these days anyways. Like, we talk about the fear of the all digital future, but we see things like this, and you start to wonder just how close we are to that if people are only buying games digitally, where Sony feels bold enough to do this, release this without a disc drive, and make it a separate purchase. Obviously, I don't have the numbers on that, but I would like to see the numbers on that. But here's where my rant comes in. You'll see a lot of people online talking about how expensive this is. And to be fair, I 100% agree. This is ridiculously expensive, even more so when you factor in the extra disk drive, which you have to pay an extra $80 for. But what I find almost hypocritical about this is that the people that will complain about this being too expensive are also the same people that will more than happily drop $100 on a video game just to play it earlier than everyone else. There is a level of hypocrisy there because effectively at that point you're telling me that you really don't have any standards when it comes to what you'll accept from developers and console manufacturers. And even worse, that the people that are complaining about this will also be the same people that will turn around and still buy this at the end of the day. You know, it's really expensive, and fuck Sony for doing this, but also I pre-ordered my copy on the 26th. Still buying it. Fuck Sony for doing this, but I'm still buying it. Like, you're really sending Sony a message that way, aren't you? Good job. Keep it up. When they talked to the analyst about who this console was for, I have to agree. It is for the ultra enthusiast, but it's also for the people that have no standards when it comes to what they will accept in terms of developers price gouging them into oblivion. He made a case about GTA 6, saying that that game could launch at $100, $120, $150, $200, and people would still buy it. What a lot of people don't understand is, or perhaps some do, is that behavior like this, it sets up the stage for what publishers, manufacturers, developers will try to get away with in the future. If you complain about video games being too expensive now, then you dropping $100 on a game to play it earlier than everybody else, in my opinion, isn't exactly helping. Because developers, they will always try to push the envelope of what they can get away with. They will always test the waters. They will always see whether or not you have a line that you don't want them to cross. But if you have no line, then they'll stop wherever they want to. When you signal that you don't have any standards or self-respect when it comes to what you will accept, then why in God's name would any of these developers, publishers, or manufacturers have any respect for you? You say you'll buy a console for $700? Sure, why not? Go right ahead. Let us know what you'll more than happily shell out money for, so that when the next generation of consoles hit, we'll be happy to make our consoles that much, if not more. Because you've shown us that you'll accept whatever we give you. Even if you do whine and complain about it, you'll still shell out money for it, so why do we care? If you have no standards, then they have no standards to reach. If you got no self-respect, then why should they respect you? You think this is bad now? At the rate we're going, it's about to get a lot worse. With that said, let's move on to my final bit of news for the day, which surrounds the breaking news that hit yesterday about Annapurna, or Anna. I want to keep saying Annapurna, but Annapurna? It's one of the two. Annapurna Interactive and the collapse of the entire studio that is Annapurna Collective. This thing kind of happened out of the blue yesterday. It broke quite quickly that the studio itself collapsed not because all the staff were laid off, but because the entire staff quit. All 25 of them. Let me go ahead and bring that news up while I'm at it. But apparently this all came through when a deal between the employees of Annapurna Interactive and the company owner, Megan Ellison, the deal fell through. And because of that, the entire studio and all the employees, they all resigned. Not quit, not laid off. They all resigned. This broke from one Jason Schreier yesterday when this whole thing kicked off. He had an update yesterday talking about from one of the president of Annapurna Interactive that all other 24 staff had resigned, but that this was also one of the hardest decisions they've ever had to make, and that they're not proud of the fact that they had to do that. And the unfortunate reality about this is that because this happened so quickly, and they had so many indie game developers that were partnered with them to publish their games, now all of those projects are kind of up in the air. There was one game that was announced back at Gamescom called Morsels, and it seemed like a pretty quirky 2D, I want to say bullet hell game to some extent. And now the question is, what happens with that? What happens to the people making that game now that this happened? Entire collapse overnight. When I kept saying that the closures of studios, the shutdowns and stuff like that was going to continue, these are examples of that happening today. The industry itself, the gaming industry as a whole, is in crazy turmoil right now. There is a wave that is happening right now that is either shutting down studios or causing people to resign from studios because decisions from the management and corporates is just not it's just not lining up, unfortunately. But unfortunately, these same people will be the ones that'll fight for corporate without realizing that corporate doesn't necessarily have your side, and they never will. Now, for those who don't know about Annapurna, you probably have seen some games that they've published. Games like Stray, the cat game, we'll call it, where you play as a cat the whole time. Kentucky Route Zero, and so on. Plus, there's also the subsidiary, which is Annapurna Pictures, which is a film studio. And there was a recent announcement from Remedy, the developers of Control and Alan Wake, that they will be partnering with Annapurna Pictures to make live-action series for both Alan Wake and Control. Now, as it stands, this event has had no effect on that, and Annapurna Pictures is still around. However, this does not mean that the trickle-down effects of this will not affect those studios as well. And I've already voiced my concerns in regards to the whole live action shit, and I've gone on a significant rant about video games and movies and this transmedia BS that I'm so tired of. Video games being movies, or movies being video games, or making their games cinematic. One of the major things that I did not like about Alan Wake 2 was a major concept that fell into that as well. I did not care for. But I have a whole set of other issues with that game in general. As opposed to Control, which was a game that I actually loved considering what it was. I still don't care for the idea of them making a live-action series with either one of these games. I think it's completely unnecessary. And the thing that I like about video games is because they're not movies. And the more you keep trying to bridge that gap, it really continues to affect my interest. The more you try to make your game a movie, the less interested I become. That's not what I come to video games for. And there is no reason why the two of those cannot exist separately. I enjoy movies from time to time. I enjoy video games. I don't need them to blend in together and become the same thing. It's not necessary. So what does this mean for the future? Well, who knows? Like I said before, we're kind of in a tumultuous time when it comes to the industry as a whole. And I can't imagine that Annapurna will be the first nor the last of situations like this. Perhaps not a case of all employees leaving the studio and resigning, but you're likely to see a lot more shutdowns happen over the course of the year as well. And look at what happened with Concord and Firewalk Studios. Concord was a wild case of a game that got pulled down from shelves literally 2 weeks after its release. You can imagine it's going to result in a lot of people getting laid off at that studio, if not the entire closure of said studio, because that was $200 million down the drain from Sony. Poof, in a matter of 2 weeks. And what blows my mind is that the developers themselves are still completely tone deaf as to why that game failed. You had one artist on Twitter talking about how she was, proud of her work and she put her soul into it, and I'm sure she did. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. But you're telling me that over the course of 8 years of development, not a single person in that studio took a step back and looked at those characters and said, yo, these are hideous. No one is going to like these. Over the course of 8 years, no one said that? Not a single person? No one said, yo, this is not going to catch on. This was also the same person that got on there complaining to content creators about how, if these weirdos keep attacking these studios and shutting these games down, they're not going to have any games left to play. And I'm thinking to myself, since when? Like, you do realize that the gaming industry itself, as a whole, is a $147 billion industry. Not to sound like a jerk, not to tap dance on people's graves, but a few studios shutting down and employees getting laid off. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that is not going to kill this industry. Because for every studio and every employee or every staff that gets laid off or closure, there is always 100 new ones that would kill for the opportunity to do what you couldn't and wouldn't. The only thing they're missing is an opportunity. So when you go on your tirades about how horrible things are in the industry and how bad gamers are and how it's all their fault things are happening, keep in mind, this is an industry where a lot of people can be very easily replaced. And the idea of attacking the customer is unfortunately not going to end well for you. And that is showing itself now. Talk about a cultural shift that's been happening in the industry as a whole. But I would argue this is a case of gamers waking up to the level of sway that they have to determine what makes it and what doesn't. And Concord just wasn't it. When there was a almost hilarious wave of people online that were going out of their way to make their own interpretations of what they thought those characters should look like. And honestly, many people didn't even have to try to make them look better. It took minimal effort to do so. And those characters looked worlds better than what you got in Concord. Which kind of kills me with this idea of what made these people think that those characters were going to catch on. So moving forward into the future, expect to see more stories like this. Perhaps not people resigning, but definitely getting laid off. Closures. Focusing on games that sell. Taking fewer risks, unfortunately. Whether that's a good thing for the industry or a bad thing, we'll have to wait and see. But I'll be curious, watching from the sidelines to see where things go into the future. And with games and consoles as well becoming more expensive as time goes on, it does cause a lot of people to be a lot more scrutinizing about what they purchase in the future. Even if you have the people that will more than happily shell out $800 for a console that will likely be replaced 3 years later. I would say I made the mistake of buying a PS4 Pro when the Pro was a thing. And I waited until roughly the latter half of the PlayStation 4's life cycle to get one. And that console lasted me about a year and a half maybe, before I got rid of it. So I can't see myself buying a Pro. I can't see myself buying a Pro. I can't see myself making that mistake. And as somebody who has kind of delved into the PC gaming space, it has kind of made me aware of what I've been missing. Even more so considering when, and I guess this would have been maybe better for Sony in the sense that they weren't putting all of their like major PlayStation Studio releases on PC as well. This were a case where all of their games were solely on the PS5, nowhere else. Effectively a Nintendo, where the only place you could play their games was on the PlayStation, and they weren't releasing those games on PC a year later, then I could see this being somewhat justified. But because all those games are also coming to PC, guaranteed to be coming to PC, considering they bought an entire studio, which is Nix's, for the sole purpose of porting their games to PC. The sell of a PS5 Pro is kind of a hard one. When you can just sit there and shell out buying a gaming PC is certainly more expensive, you get the option of playing not just PlayStation games, but also Xbox games, PC exclusive games. Like the library you have available to you if you were to get a gaming PC is much broader than what it is on just a console. So if you're concerned about graphics, power, or making your games look better, or if you're quote unquote the ultra enthusiast, which is a term that is generally used in the PC gaming space when it comes to buying gaming hardware, to see this happen in the console space is just weird. But again, like I said before, the only reason why things like this happen is because gamers in general don't have any standards when it comes to what they will accept and what they won't. Much like those who buy Apple products at the drop of a hat, more than willing to accept whatever Apple throws at them, even if it means removing features and then selling them to you later on down the road, like a disk drive, for example. You continue to show them that you will more than happily accept that. So why would they ever stop? Why stop at $700? Why not go to $800? Why not $900? But okay, I think that's all I got for now. My voice is starting to leave me again because I've been talking too much as per usual. That's gonna wrap it up for this episode. I gotta call it here. Otherwise, my voice is gonna be gone. I can't keep going like this. Unfortunately, there's a lot more I would have to say, but I can't. Not right now. I've already ranted too much. Ryan says, but I just tuned in. As catch from the beginning. You'll have to catch it from the beginning. Anyways, that is gonna do it for today's episode. I don't know where things are gonna go from here, and I'll probably end up getting some shit for calling people out on this whole PlayStation 5 Pro thing. But I can't sit there and follow people on this whole concept of bitching about a price point, but then being the same people that will buy it regardless of how much they complain about it. And what I found hilarious too is that I've heard some people complain about the price point that I know will end up buying anyways, but then in the same breath talked about how the new Apple press release was happening this morning and how they had to pre-order the new phones that were coming out. Like we made a joke about Sony and Apple, but I didn't think it would be this on the fucking nose. I guess that's where we are now, huh? Yeah, and if you have no standards, why would they ever respect what you want and don't want? Because you clearly have nothing that you won't accept. They want to keep serving you dog shit on a plate. They'll keep doing that because you won't tell them no. Social media links are in the banners below. Should check those out. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like the video. If you enjoyed it, that is. I don't know. maybe you enjoyed this episode. Maybe you didn't. Like I said, I'll probably end up getting some shit for some of the stuff that I talked about here, but whatever. I at this point, my ability to care. As I notice as I get older, my ability to care is starting to leave me as my age increases. So that's kind of a thing as well. But yeah, I'll try to have this up. This should be up there. This archive of this should be up on YouTube as well for those who want to watch it there. I'll probably end up having to edit the pre-show stuff at the beginning. And maybe I'll make some clips of this and post it on YouTube as well, depending on how I feel about it. But yeah, that's the 30s for you. It's funny, like me and my sister kind of joked around about that when I first hit 30. She's 3 years older than me. This was like on my 30th birthday, and I was like concerned about like, oh, I'm turning 30. I feel like I'm getting old. And she was like, don't worry about it. She was like, the main thing about turning 30 is that your ability to give a shit goes out the window. You stop caring. And we laughed about that, but looking back on that, she was right. She was right. But anyways, guys, thank you all for watching. I will see you all next week for another episode. And maybe next week I'll try to put out some quick hit stuff for like news that's dropping on those days. If I can find time to do that, I'll try to do that. We'll see how that goes. But you know, it depends on how the workload allows me to do so. I also got to get a new pair of headphones as well because these are not doing it anymore. Until next time, you guys all have a wonderful day or night, depending where you are in the world. You all stay classy, stay sharp. Don't do anything that I wouldn't do. And I will catch you guys next time. Thank you all for watching. Love all your faces. I'm out of here. Deuces. And fade to black.